Okay, without further ado, welcome everyone to our Somerville Tenants Rights webinar presented by CAAS, the Community Action Agency of Somerville, in partnership with the Somerville Office of Housing Stability, OHS. My name is Nicole Eichbrett. I'm the Director of Community Organizing, and I'm pleased to welcome the City of Somerville Mayor Katjana Ballantyne for welcoming remarks.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming here and logging in with us on this webinar. Thank you to the City's Office of Housing Stability and to CAAS for organizing the Tenants' Rights Workshop. Workshops like this are really important. When you know your rights, you feel empowered to fight for your rights. Housing prices have risen dramatically in Somerville and in our neighboring communities, making it more and more difficult for tenants to pay rent and homeowners to make their mortgage payments. This is a big problem that we need to use every tool to exist and that we need to help from our neighbors in addressing. As we continue to work to tackle the housing crisis, please know that help is available now. If you're having trouble making housing payments, or you're facing eviction or displacement, reach out as soon as you can. CAAS and our Office of Housing Stability have resources available. In recent years, we have looked for immediate solutions to help residents stay in their homes. We opened the Office of Housing Stability, which among a lot of other good work has helped renters and low-income landlords access nearly $3 million in housing assistance funds. We increased our inclusionary zoning requirements, which means developers have to build more affordable units when they take on a project here in Somerville. We've expanded contracts to provide people facing displacement with legal representation, and we've created housing flex funds that help get over some of the barriers to other housing funding sources. We're set to invest another $1 million in ARPA funding into our flex fund. While we continue to support immediate aid, we also need to look longer term and address some of the more structural barriers tenants face. We are focusing on job training and expanding economic opportunity so that residents can earn more to keep up with the cost of living. We are also advocating at the state level for additional tenant protections, like a real estate transfer fee that would create new funding sources. That means more money for affordable housing, the right to counsel for tenants facing eviction, and sealing the eviction records so that residents are blocked from future housing opportunities. And as I said earlier, we have to use every tool in our toolbox. So that includes looking at rent stabilization. As we continue to work towards longer-term solutions to our housing crisis, I want to reiterate that immediate help is available if you need it. And again, I want to emphasize just how important knowing your rights is. You've taken a big step in protecting yourselves and others by joining this workshop today. Thank you for being here. And I hope you can come away with more tools and feel more empowered.
Thank you so much, Mayor Ballantyne. And so now I'd like to invite Ellen Schachter, the Director of Somerville Office of Housing Stability, to present on tenant and landlord rights in Somerville. So Sam, if you'd like to share your screen. And Ellen, please just let Sam know when to change slides.
Great. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We can move on to the next slide. This is just This is the office. This is a brief overview of what we're going to cover tonight. I'm not going to go over it right in depth now because I know that we don't have a lot of time. And I did just want to let people know if we don't get through all of the slides, we will be sending them to you, as Nicole had mentioned. So hopefully they will be helpful to you, even if we can't discuss each and every one tonight. Next slide, please. So the first thing that you need to understand if you are trying to understand what your rights are as a tenant is what kind of tenancy you have. There's essentially two kinds, although on the next slide you'll see a third I sneak in, but there are essentially two kinds of tenancies. One is a tenancy under lease, and the second is a tenant at will. The rights you have as a tenant will be different depending on whether you fit in the first category or the second. So what is a tenant under lease? What does that mean? Sometimes people think it just means you have something in writing, but that is not the only criteria. For there to be a lease, there does need to be a written agreement for a set period of time. Usually leases are for a year. They could be for 6 months, 2 years, 3 years. Also, what it means to have a lease is that the terms of the lease are set and can't change during that lease. So for example, if your rent is $1,000 and you have a lease, the landlord cannot increase that rent during the term of the lease. What else? If you have a lease, a landlord cannot seek to evict you during the term of the lease unless you've done something wrong, unless you have violated your lease and they can prove that. Last, just to know, under a lease, usually there is a provision in written leases that say you cannot bring in new roommates without the written permission of the owner. As you will see, that is not always the case with your legal rights as a tenancy at will. So there are good things about being a tenant under lease, and there are difficult things about being a tenant under lease. For a tenant at will, it can be oral or written, but it is typically a month-to-month tenancy. So that means if the landlord decides after a month that they want you to leave, they can send you a notice to vacate. Can't do it under a lease. As a tenant at will, you can, right? But it also means that you as a tenant have the right to leave when you want to leave with a month's notice to your landlord. So it provides flexibility to both parties. In a tough rental market, that can be difficult, but there are advantages to being able to leave when you want to leave and not being liable for the rent. Another thing that's good about being a tenant at will is usually there's nothing in writing. So usually there are not a lot of rules, right? In a lease, you often will have 3 pages of things that it tells you that you can or can't do. With an oral tenancy at will, there's really only a few basic rules. You have to pay your rent. You can't disturb your neighbors. You can't engage in illegal activity. But other than that, there's not a lot of restrictions without a lease. And last, if there's nothing in writing telling you that you cannot have a roommate, you can generally bring in roommates without the permission of the owner. This is legally speaking. An owner may tell you something different, but under the law, there is nothing prohibiting you from having a roommate unless it says that you cannot in your lease. Next slide, please. Okay, this third category I said I would sneak in. This is subtenancies. And a lot of times people don't know whether they're actually a tenant or a subtenant. So how do you know, and what is a subtenant? A subtenant basically is somebody who has no direct relationship with the landlord, with the owner of the building. They generally will rent a room or an apartment from another tenant. That is called a primary tenant in these circumstances. In Spanish, this word is called encargado. So you may hear that term frequently if you're a Spanish speaker. So how do you know if you're a subtenant? So 1, who did you rent the apartment or room from? Was it another tenant or was it the owner? Is there somebody that has a lease for the apartment? And are you on that lease? If there's a lease only to one tenant, And it's only between that tenant and the owner, and that tenant rents to you a room and you're not on that lease, you're a subtenant. You do not have a direct relationship with the owner. You now have a relationship with that tenant who acts like your landlord. And so what does this mean? If you're a subtenant, it means that all of the rights and responsibilities you have are between you and that other tenant. The landlord cannot evict you. The primary tenant would have to evict you, but you cannot force the landlord to make repairs because that landlord didn't rent to you. You would have to try to force the primary tenant to get repairs done, and that person would then have to try to go make the landlord do that. So again, your direct relationship is with a tenant, not a landlord, and that does change your rights and obligations when you're living in a building. Next slide, please. So what are some tips just to think about when you're first renting an apartment? One, if you pay a deposit to a realtor or an owner, what they might call a holding fee while they're looking at your application, you want to get something in writing from that person saying that that deposit will be returned to you if you are not given the apartment. Second, do not pay for anything in cash without getting a receipt if at all possible. Third, write on your check or money order what the payment is for. Is it for the first month's rent? Is it for a security deposit? What is it for? Try to get that in writing, and you can write it yourself on it, something that you give to the landlord. You can always offer the landlord a bank check, which is like money, and put an endorsement on that if you don't have your own personal checking account. Last, you want to make sure that you know who is paying for utilities in this situation, because utilities can be very expensive. So when you're thinking about your budget, you want to know who's paying. Is the landlord paying, or am I paying, or is it being divided amongst tenants? You also want to know what kind of heat you have. Electric heat is far more expensive just to think about for budgeting, but on the other hand, it's a lot better for the environment. And I will say we're going to have some great programs in the city coming up to help think about transitions to electric heat, but it's something you want to think about when you're budgeting. Next slide, please. Okay, what can a landlord charge you when they are renting you an apartment? Legally, they can charge you a first month's rent, a last month's rent, 1 month security deposit, and a key deposit. A landlord is not allowed to charge you a realtor's fee. A realtor can charge you a realtor's fee, but sometimes the owners ask for those fees and it's really them that's renting the apartment. So they are not allowed to get an additional month under those circumstances. A landlord, if you pay a security deposit, which is the most frequent kind of deposit, must give you a written receipt for that deposit. They must tell you what bank account it is in. They must put it in a bank account that pays you interest. So you should be getting interest every single year on your deposit. If you're not, it can be subtracted from your rent, and you should be telling your landlord how much interest was there on my deposit so you can subtract it out. Last, a landlord has to return your security deposit within 30 days after you move, but you must give the owner your forwarding address, because if you move out and they don't have that, they're not going to have any place to send the deposit. If you don't want them to know your address and you're working with an advocate, you can give them that information. Really critically, if an owner violates this law, you can be entitled to 3 times a security deposit. So it's important to know your rights, and there are opportunities to enforce your rights. Next slide, please. Rent increases. You heard the mayor speak about rent increases, and I know that is on a lot of your minds. So I'm going to tell you what you can and can't do, or some things to think about when you're facing a rent increase. First of all, as a reminder, a landlord cannot raise your rent during the term of the lease. They can ask for more rent if they're renewing your lease. If you're a tenant at will, a landlord must give you a full rental period notice of an increase. But what does this mean? Do you have to agree? Do you have to pay the higher rent? And what are your choices? First, you do not have to agree to a rent increase. A tenancy is a contract, and that means the landlord offers you something and you get to decide whether you accept that. So you want to make a choice. Can I afford this rent increase? Is it reasonable? And just know that once you pay it once, you have agreed to the higher rent. So you should not pay it once if you won't be able to continue paying it. Think about your budget. Okay, so what else? If you can afford it and you want to do it, that's a choice. You can also try to negotiate a lesser increase with the owner, right? You can try to say, you've asked me for 300, I can't afford that. I'm willing to pay you $75 increase. That's what I think I can afford. Now, what if you just say no? Can you continue to pay your old rent? And the answer is yes. If you do not agree to a rent increase, you can continue to pay your old rent for as long as you are there under almost all circumstances. There are risks. If you don't agree to a rent increase, a landlord may decide not to renew your lease or may start eviction proceedings, but always know you may have defenses, you may have counterclaims, and we can help you in many cases, if you're income eligible, to have an attorney to help you fight an eviction. Last, you can organize. You're going to be hearing a lot from the organizers later in the session. It really helps your bargaining power. And last, I just wanted you to know there is no law in Massachusetts now that allows us to control rents or to stop big rent increases. There's a bill pending. You heard the mayor give her support. We are really, really hoping and working to make sure that cities like Somerville can have reasonable rent rules if that passes the legislature, but we can't do it without the state passing it. Next slide, please. Bad conditions, state sanitary code. The law that says what the conditions have to be met in Massachusetts is called the state sanitary code. On this slide, and you will be getting it, I gave you a link to Mass Legal Help, which has a great checklist to tell you what all of the requirements are in regards to building conditions in your home. These are some examples. I'm not going to go over them all, but just know heat 68 degrees in the day, 64 at night, secure locks, weather tight windows, etc. I'm going to move to the next slide, but please do check that housing checklist. Next slide, please. So what do you do if there's a sanitary code violation, a condition that is really impacting you and you need it to get repaired? First, you want to contact your landlord and you want to take photographs. If there is anything that can be visible with a camera, use your phone. Second, if it doesn't work after you've spoken to the landlord and asked to make repairs, put a letter in writing and keep a copy. If possible, you can do this by email because you have a record of your email, or you can send it by certified mail. It's important to be able to prove that the landlord received your letter. You can also send a text if you have the landlord's number. That is another way to put something in writing. Third, and this is very important, if the landlord still fails to fix something that is significant or that you need to have repaired and they have not listened to what you say or to your letters, you need to be in touch with the Inspectional Services Department, also known as the Board of Health, to get an inspection. To do that, you call 311 and you tell them you need an inspection. A couple of things are important. If you want the whole house inspected, your whole apartment, you need to tell the inspector, please inspect for all conditions in the apartment. Otherwise, they will only inspect for what you have told them was wrong initially. Second, if you need an interpreter, tell 311 you need an interpreter there, and they do have many languages on 311, and the Board of Health should provide you with an interpreter. Fourth, rent withholding. Lots of people have heard about rent withholding, and it is true that as a tenant, you have the right to withhold rent if a landlord fails to make repairs. However, I do not advise this unless you already have an inspection report from the Board of Health saying that there are bad conditions that need to be repaired. Otherwise, you will put yourself at risk of eviction and not have proof that you are actually rent withholding. Last, in some cases, there is the right to break a lease if you have very bad conditions and no repair was made after an ISD inspection. If you are thinking about doing this, please talk to an attorney or call OHS for advice before making a decision to break your lease, because if you just leave, you will be liable for all of the rent under that lease, unless you have broken it legally and unless you can make sure that the owner understands that. Next slide, please. Retaliation. A landlord cannot retaliate against you for doing certain things, and that means they can't raise your rent or try to evict you because you are enforcing your rights. Here are some of the things that they can't retaliate for. If you call the Inspectional Services Department, they cannot retaliate against you for that. If you ask for repairs in writing, they cannot retaliate. That in writing is critical. If you say, I told my landlord 3 times that I needed my heat fixed and now they're trying to evict me, you will not be protected under these laws unless you have put that request in writing. A landlord also cannot retaliate if you participate in a tenants organization, and they cannot retaliate if you take a legal action against them. You go to court to sue them or you file some kind of other claim against them. If you do one of these acts, if let's say you put a letter in writing to your landlord saying that repairs need to be made, and a landlord raises your rent or tries to evict you within 6 months, that will be presumed to be retaliation. And that means the landlord will be presumed to have violated the law unless the landlord can prove they would have taken this action anyway. And they have a very high burden of proof to prove that. The penalty for violation of this law is 1 to 3 months rent plus attorney's fees. So it may be possible to get a free attorney to help with these claims in eviction, or to get an attorney to help you for free because they may be able to get attorney's fees as a private attorney. Next slide, please. Interference with quiet enjoyment. So this, and the law is referenced here. What does this mean? There's a whole lot of things in a statute, which is called Mass General Law, Chapter 186.15. And just so anyone knows, all you have to do is put in Google MGL Chapter 186.15b, Massachusetts, and the law will pop up. So these references make it so that you can actually read the laws for yourself. So when can a landlord enter your apartment? What the law says is that they have to give you reasonable advance notice. That is usually interpreted as being 24 to 48 hours. If you cannot be there at a time when they suggest, you can ask them to reschedule at a time that you can be present. A landlord is only allowed by law to come into your apartment to inspect conditions, fix conditions, or show a unit for rent or for sale. You can agree to let them in for other reasons, but you are not obligated to do so. Do you have the right to have visitors? You have the right to have visitors of your choosing, and as often as you want in most cases, unless there is a disturbance that is disturbing other tenants or neighbors. They cannot decide they don't like the look of your visitors. They cannot decide that they don't like that your visitor is coming over every day. I will say in subsidized and public housing, they can have limits on how many overnight guests that you can have. Can my landlord lock me out? And what do I do if he or she does? If my landlord locks you out and they have not gotten a court order, you would have had to have gotten notice to get into court with a notice to quit, a court summons, etc. It is unlawful for the landlord to just change your locks. If for any reason this would happen, you could go directly to court. You could call OHS or CAAS if during work hours. And if it's at night, The police are an option. The police have been notified and they do know that a landlord is not supposed to lock a tenant out without a court order. And I have seen many instances in which the police have told owners that they couldn't lock somebody out. I know it is often scary to call the police and I can never promise what an individual person will say, but in my experience, the Somerville police have been good when called in lockout situations. And also, a landlord cannot shut off your utilities because you haven't paid your rent. Next slide, please. Eviction. There are 5 stages of an eviction. The first is a notice to quit, which will give you a certain number of days notice that the landlord is terminating your tenancy. Second, after that expires, you would get a summary process summons and complaint, a document that tells you that you have a court hearing coming up. Third is a judgment or agreement for judgment. That is after you have had your trial or you have met in court and you've come to an agreement with your landlord. The judgment is a document that will issue saying, do you get to stay? Do you have to leave? Does the owner owe you money? Do you owe them money? Next is an execution. That is the piece of paper that issues. If a judgment was that you have to leave your apartment by April 1st, the execution is the piece of paper that goes to a constable. And then when they have that, they can give you a notice of levy saying you have to leave your apartment. We're going to talk about protections about this in a minute. Next slide, please. Just remember, only a judge can evict you. If a landlord tells you you have to move out, I do not suggest moving under the following circumstances. Do not move if you don't have a new apartment to go to, in most cases. Second, if you are being evicted potentially for no fault, you might be able to get housing through public or subsidized housing quickly. If you move out voluntarily without an eviction, you will lose this opportunity. And last, get a lawyer. You can contact OHS, our office, for help in getting a lawyer, or you can call one of the legal services agencies directly. Next slide, please. So in Somerville, we passed a new law called the Housing Stability Notification Act. We were the first in the state to do so. And that says that when a landlord gives you a notice to quit or a notice they won't renew your lease, they have to give you information about tenants' rights and about resources, where to find a lawyer, where to find rental assistance. If you get a notice to quit or a court summons and you don't get this document, please call our office because we need to be reporting that to the Board of Health. They have the ability to fine the landlord. We want to make sure tenants are getting notices of their rights in the eviction process. Next slide, please. Special protections due to COVID. Many of you may have heard or know that there is a moratorium on evictions in Somerville. I want to be clear, though, that doesn't mean a court can't order you evicted. What it does mean is that constable can't physically remove you from your home while this eviction moratorium is in place. Ours is set to end on April 30th unless it gets extended. Other state eviction protections that are just in place due to COVID. Essentially, these special rights say that if you have filed a request for rental assistance and you are being evicted for non-payment of rent, you cannot be ordered evicted if that application is pending. That means we know it takes time to get rental assistance. And if you filed and you're trying to do so, they cannot evict you for non-payment of rent. This protection expires on April 1st, but we do believe it will be extended in the supplemental budget, which the legislature is this week deciding on. Next slide, please. Discrimination. I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go through this one fairly quickly, but I did just want to say,
Ellen?
Yes. How much
You're
time?
actually on perfect time right now.
Oh, good.
You
Okay.
have until 7:20.
Perfect. Okay, I didn't know that. Thanks so much. 10 minutes. Perfect. Okay. So people know that there are rights, that there are laws that prevent discrimination in housing. And so as you can see here, it's unlawful to refuse to rent someone an apartment or to apply different rules to them, charge higher rent than somebody else, for example, because of race, color, national origin, religion, gender, sexual orientation or gender identity, disability, importantly, receipt of public assistance or having a housing subsidy, right? Like Section 8, or if you have children, the landlord really has to de-lead if there's lead paint. It is discrimination to tell a family, I can't rent to you, there's lead paint and you have children. What I do want to say is the only way a landlord can get around this, let's say you believe that you have been discriminated against because you have a Section 8 voucher. The landlord is allowed to show that they have a valid business, non-discriminatory reason to not rent you that apartment, which they're saying it's not because you have a voucher, it's for some other reason. And one example, unfortunately, they are allowed to deny you for is if the rent that can be paid under that Section 8 voucher is not the rent they're asking. However, they cannot refuse you because they don't like paperwork, because there's an inspection requirement, or because they've heard bad things about Section 8 tenants, for example. So we do have in the city of Somerville a fair housing specialist, Stace Pelton. This is her contact information. If you believe you may have been discriminated against, either because the landlord wants to raise your rent more than your neighbors, or because they won't give you an apartment and you don't think there's a valid business reason, please reach out to Stace Pelton. She can help you to file a complaint and try to intervene with your landlord to do what they can to make sure you have full access to apartments and that you're not being discriminated against. Next slide, please. This is the last slide, and I know that it only applies to some of you, but I really wanted to make sure that those in the audience who are immigrants understand what the rules are around immigration and access to affordable housing, and also what we call public charge. When I get to public charge, I will explain what that is. So the first thing I did want to say, federal housing programs, the Section 8 program, or what we call federal public housing, have immigration restrictions. Many of us have been fighting to stop these restrictions for a very long time, but they are in place. And what that means is that if you are not a legal permanent resident, or if you don't have at least, this is complicated, but if you don't, you have to have one legal permanent resident in your household to be able to get into housing. But if you have more than one person who is ineligible, you end up having to pay higher rent. So it's complicated. So if you have people in your household that are not legal permanent residents, federal housing may be restricted. You can get advice from our office. But really importantly, Somerville has great programs that are open to immigrants regardless of immigration status. The first one, state public housing, all state programs are open to all families, whether documented or not. And here is a link to that state public housing application. And again, in that program, you pay 30%, essentially 30% of your income for rent. Also, the city's inclusionary program. That's the program where when developers, the mayor spoke about this, when the developers develop new housing, they have to have affordable units. Those affordable units have no immigration restrictions. And so you will see the link here to this. You can get on a list to get notices of all the inclusionary housing opportunities that come up. And last, Somerville has a really unique program called the 100 Homes program. And this is not for the very, very lowest income people, but it is for many people. It will make their rent affordable in Somerville. And this is a link to that application. And that is run by the Somerville Community Corporation. And they run that program. And there are priorities for people who are facing displacement. So a really important program to know about as an immigrant. And the last thing I wanted to say relates to what we call public charge. And I know probably most most immigrants on this phone call know what public charge is, but others may not. So I will tell you briefly. Public charge is a rule that the federal government put in place that it considers when it's deciding whether or not you can become a legal permanent resident in the United States. And essentially, they check to see, will you be a public charge? Will you be a burden on the government? And they think that if that's the case, they have the right to not allow you to adjust your status or to get your permanent residency. Public charge also is an issue if you leave the country for more than 6 months and you come back in. So what is very, very important is for all immigrants to know that there are many programs that you will not hurt you in terms of public charge. If you live in public or subsidized housing, it will not hurt you when you try to adjust your status. If you get rental assistance help through CAAS, through our office, through the Homeless Coalition, it will not hurt you if you go to change your status. The same is true for fuel assistance and many other programs. I've listed the housing here, but that's true for food stamps, for SNAP, that's true for Mass Help. So I am going to wrap up, but please don't feel afraid to apply for benefits that you need for your family. Please consult with our office or elsewhere if you need more information. And I think this is the last slide and I'm about out of time. So thank you very much. And I'm here to answer questions at the end.
Okay, thank you so much, Ellen. Really grateful for that insightful and very knowledgeable presentation. Again, for everyone on the call, you will receive the presentation slides and a recording of the webinar in an email by the end of this week. So now I would like to invite Lydia Lopez from the Office of Housing Stability, along with CAAS Housing Advocacy Program staff, Charlotte Blumenfeld and Anna Grove, to speak for a couple of minutes about housing advocacy services. So Lydia, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Is Sam still in charge of the slides? Yes. Okay. So Sam, could you please move on to the next slide? So my name is Lydia Lopez and I work with Ellen Schachter at the Office of Housing Stability. The previous slide that you saw was our mission statement. But I know that everyone is here because they want to know about our services. So we've heard this amazing presentation. I know my rights, so what do I do next, right? And I really just want to emphasize, if you get anything out of this presentation, is to please, please, please call us if you have any doubts or any questions. I'm sure Charlotte will talk more about this, but both our organizations have a no wrong door policy, which basically means you can text us, you can email us, you can call us, you can use the link of our referral form, which way you come to us, that's fine with us. We will answer whatever questions and offer you whatever assistance would be available. So the slide that you're seeing in front of you right now is just a very brief and high level bullet points of what our office does. And so just very, very briefly and very, very broadly, we basically work with tenants not only on landlord housing issues, but also on a milieu of issues concerning affordability, right? So things like applying or understanding which affordable housing programs, like the ones that Ellen spoke about, would be applicable to you. If you have any questions, if you got a letter in the mail and you don't really know, to make heads or tails of it. Those are all things that our office can do. Or, if let's say it doesn't fit under the preview of housing stability, we do refer out, and we are in collaboration with other offices in the city, as well as other nonprofits like our friends at CAAS, for instance, like with organizing, which we will hear more about. So generally, again, the encouragement here is to please always call us for whatever questions that you may have. And if anything, right, you'll end up with good information and prepared, right, to make whatever decisions you need to make. Can I see the next slide, please? Great. What happens then if I get a notice to quit, right? I think the first thing that all of us, right, at OHS and other organizations that do this work is to always try to keep families stably housed where they to remain where they are as much as possible, right? And whether that means rental assistance, whether that means a referral to legal services, like it says on number 2, or any other resources that Ellen and or the mayor briefly talked about. Are you a landlord or a tenant that has any questions about things that are going on with their unit, right? Just like we saw briefly with Ellen's presentation, maybe you saw that graph and you thought, hey, wait a minute, my landlord doesn't do this, or this is a problem that I see in my apartment. Maybe it's time to give us a call and see what options may be available, or we can take a little bit more time than just a presentation to sort of walk you through how to ask for writing, right, to your landlord for repairs, or give you advice on those matters. Or let's say you are one of the folks who are joining us and might be affected or experiencing the brief conversations we had about public charge, and maybe you didn't know that you were eligible to apply for public housing, and so you want to know more about it, right? So this is absolutely a chance to give our office a call and see, what applications, what types of affordable housing programs you would be eligible for. And then finally, and I really want to emphasize this, is if you're behind on rent and don't know what to do and don't know where to start, or you think, geez, I'm never going to be able to pay this money off, please, please, please give us a call. We're happy to help. I know that there's other organizations here in Somerville, and I'm sure Charlotte from CAAS will talk more about it, but we're really here to help and we're really here to support. And so the encouragement here is really to give us a call before it's too late, right? Before things are sort of out of hand. Even if you feel like you're being threatened, even if you haven't received anything in the mail, even if your landlord has just, had conversations with you, but there's been no action, right? That's the time to call us, right? And that's the time to really consider what options you may have. And so with that, I'd like to ask Sam to go to the next slide as well. And so now that we've talked about a little bit of our services, how do we actually get in contact with you all? So the number that you see right here is our intake form. And currently in our office, we have folks that speak Spanish and Portuguese. We boast native Spanish speakers that we're very proud of. And for any other language that we don't have in office, we use the language line. So that is to say, if you don't speak Spanish or Portuguese, you will still receive services from our office, and you will still be served regardless of what language you speak. So that's the encouragement to please call, leave a voicemail, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If tech is more of your preference, then you can go to our website, somervillema.gov/OHS, and click on Make a Referral. That goes directly onto our spreadsheet that all our team sees. And so there's many, many different eyes, and we try to get back to clients at least in 2 to 3 business days. So that's basically what I want to leave you all. I really encourage you all, no matter how small or how big the question is, that you decide to call our office after this presentation. And if anything that Ellen or Mayor Ballantyne spoke about, to please give us a call. And I hope to hear from all of you soon. So thank you very much, Nicole.
Thanks, Lydia. I'm now going to pass it over to Charlotte and Anna.
Hello, can we go to the next slide? Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lydia, for that presentation. That was really, really thorough and informative. Anna and I work for CAAS, specifically with the Housing Advocacy Program. A lot of our services are very similar to what Lydia explained for the Office of Housing Stability. So we'll go a little bit into that, but also just so everyone knows, it's kind of fair to assume that everything Lydia said, you can also call CAAS HAP for any of those needs as well. So my name is Charlotte and I'm a housing stability case manager, and I'm here today with Anna.
Yes, like Charlotte said, my name's Anna, and I am one of 4 housing advocates at CAAS.
You can go to the next slide.
So I'm just going to go over a little bit of what CAAS HAP services are. A lot of this is what Lydia already said. So basically, if you have received a notice to quit from your landlord, like Ellen said before, the important thing is to know that your landlord can't evict you, only a judge can evict you. So you can call CAAS or OHS, and we can refer you to legal services or talk through your case and get advice from our legal service providers to help you with the court process. We can also refer you to our organizing department if that is relevant to your case. If you owe rent, or if you're behind on rent, or you're worried that you'll be very soon behind on rent, we can talk through what you qualify for and help you apply for the appropriate rental assistance funding source. And then also, if your rent is just unaffordable, it's not going to work for much longer, CAAS can help you apply to affordable housing that you qualify for. And if you've received some sort of affordable housing, we can also help you with the moving process or the housing search process that goes along with that. And the thing to keep in mind with all this is that there are like eligibility requirements that go along with these. So as long as you meet those, we can help you out with any of these 3 services.
Yeah, and I'll just continue on with that. And, if you have questions, if you think you might meet the income eligibility, the next slide, we're going to talk about contact, but similar to what Lydia said, anything that has to do with housing, please reach out and, ask and see if we can help you and we have services. And then I just wanted to go on a little bit more and differentiate Anna's role from mine. So as a housing advocate, Anna works on the things that are listed on these slides, and we also have other housing advocates on the team. And then my role as a housing stability case manager is, once you've received one of these services from a CAAS advocate, you often can get transferred to work with me more long-term. And this is also similar to what Lydia said, but where I come in is I can help you, get referred to other services that you might be in need of. So say you need help applying for food stamps, or say you need clothing, or, any service that you might need that's not specifically housing related. Once you're in the door at CAAS and you've received housing assistance, it's very likely that you'll continue on working with me, and I can, either personally help you or refer you to other resources in the community that would address pretty much any other need. So that's just something that's good to know, that, you can start working with HAP for housing issues, but we're also available to help connect you with other resources in the community. We can go to the next slide.
Yes, so the best way to contact us at the Housing Advocacy Program is through our online application, which is available in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But if tech isn't your thing, we also have a phone number that you can call and leave a voicemail, and we will hop on the phone with you and help you fill out the online application over the phone. So we have those are the 2 best ways to contact us.
Yeah, and then I guess just, finishing off, this is, again, sorry, stuff that Lydia said, but just kind of, anything, if you're like thinking you're anticipating that your landlord might make, moves to evict, or that's something that you're thinking might happen, but it hasn't happened yet, don't wait to reach out. You can reach out now, get connected with someone, and, we can try to help you early on. So yeah, please reach out to CAAS HAP via this online form or this phone number, or any of our personal phone numbers that are on the website. I think that is all for us.
Thank you so much, Charlotte and Anna. Really grateful for all the work that you do for CAAS HAP. And in partnership with the CAAS community organizing team. So Sam, if you'd like to go to the next slide. This is the last piece of our presentation. We're going to talk a bit about the community organizing and advocacy program at CAAS. And this is just a reminder for everyone attending the webinar. If you have any questions, we will be doing question and answer right after this final presentation. And many of you have been sending your questions in the chat to someone at CAAS. That's great. We're collecting your questions, so please keep those coming. But otherwise, I'm excited to talk about the organizing program because whereas the work that OHS and CAAS HAP tends to focus more on an individual household, we in the organizing team are about bringing the community together, neighbors, and neighbors of the same building and neighbors across the city to collectively work for change. So we're really working alongside residents to eliminate the root causes of injustice, really focusing on housing. And I just want to give a big shout out to all the tenants and volunteers and neighbors that I see on our webinar tonight who've been really leading and part of this work. So next slide, please. So this is a photo of our Somerville Renters Committee, and it's just one example of some of the work that we do. So one of the services in the CAAS organizing program we offer is educating Somerville residents about their rights. And so again, we are on the ground in the community as much as we can in person, given the pandemic situation, but we're often out there knocking on doors or holding webinars and virtual meetings to educate you all about your rights. And that's your rights in private market housing as well as public housing. And we especially want to make sure that the renters in our community who identify as working class, have a lower income, are people of color, are immigrants or do not speak English, know about your rights, because we know that oftentimes that information can be hard to access and sometimes it can be scary or intimidating to advocate for yourself. So this is just one example of one of our groups that's come together as through the CAAS organizing program. Next slide. Here's another example of our community volunteers in the Eviction Response Network. So if you're a resident, maybe who has housing stability right now, but you still want to help your neighbors, our Eviction Response Network is an amazing group of volunteers that meets every month to do canvases in the community. So we take our Know Your Rights flyers and we leave them at our neighbors' doors. And it's just another opportunity to connect with people in the Somerville community while making sure that everyone knows their rights as a renter and where to find help if you're struggling to pay rent or facing an eviction. Next slide. So one of our second services at the CAAS organizing program is our renters meetings. So the purpose of our Somerville Renters meetings is to connect Somerville renters of all backgrounds in a supportive space where, again, you can learn about your rights, meet your neighbors, share your story, especially if you're struggling with your own housing, right? And just want to be heard and seen by your neighbors. And most importantly, we also learn about political education and community organizing together. And so we host these meetings, which have been virtual on Zoom every month. And the next meeting is coming up on April 12th. So we would encourage everyone who identifies as a Somerville renter to please consider joining us. I just dropped the registration link in the chat, and we would love to have you. So next slide. So this next slide is a picture of our Somerville Renters community. So despite us, having to be safe during the pandemic and do many of our activities online and on Zoom, we do try to do some activities in person. So back in the fall, before we had the Omicron surge, we did host a Friendsgiving dinner potluck with all of the neighbors and renters who have been coming to CAAS meetings. So again, if anyone is looking for a supportive group where you can learn about your rights and feel empowered and supported, we strongly encourage you to come to our Somerville Renters meetings. Okay, next slide. Okay, so our third program service from CAAS Organizing is really developing the leadership of residents here in Somerville who are ready to organize for change, either within your specific apartment building or citywide. And we do this through collective community action and campaigns. So what you're looking at is actually photos of two different public demonstrations that were organized by our team. So the top photo was a protest against evictions that we held in October of 2020. And then the photo on the bottom is actually another protest that we had against evictions in front of Somerville City Hall this past September. And we were so proud that through our collective organizing and advocacy efforts, we actually won an extension of the Somerville Municipal Eviction Moratorium. So that was the policy that Ellen told us about earlier that has prevented physical evictions from happening in our city. So this is really just a true policy example and campaign example of how when we come together as neighbors and organize and raise our voices, we can really make a difference, not only for ourselves, but for people across the city. And again, I just want to congratulate everyone here who was part of this campaign and made this victory possible. Okay, next slide. And here's another photo actually from an event we held Monday. So here's another example of some of the collective organizing that we do. On Monday, the CAAS community organizing team gathered with our neighbors and many of our tenant leaders at the Leechmere MBTA station to celebrate the grand opening of the new Green Line train extension. However, we held a press conference because we know that many of the residents, especially renters who live near the new Green Line extension, are at risk of displacement. Many of our neighbors are receiving unaffordable rent increases or their buildings are going up for sale. And so this was an opportunity for us, again, to raise our voices and be heard and make sure our lawmakers understand that we need greater housing protections. So this is just an example of how all the work that our organizations and partners do between OHS, CAAS, other groups like the Homeless Coalition, it all fits together in this important housing justice puzzle. And if you're wondering where you fit in this puzzle, community organizing may be a way that you can make a difference. Okay, next slide. Okay, and our fourth service from the CAAS organizing program is really the support that we provide in advocacy. So if you are a renter and facing bad or unsafe living conditions, let's just say that your property and your apartment needs a lot of repairs and they aren't getting done, or for if you're facing poor treatment by your landlord or property management, we can help you with this. And the photo that you're looking at is an example of a campaign that we've been organizing with our neighbor Vanessa, whose landlord has been not treating her well and refusing to give her a new and affordable lease. So what our community did is come together on Zoom in February, and we started calling the landlord and sending emails and saying, hey, it's unacceptable what your treatment is towards Vanessa right now. And thanks to our collective efforts and all the pressure we put on the landlord, he's willing to negotiate, I think now, and listen to more of our demands. So, obviously this is a lot of effort. And again, it can be kind of scary to want to bring your story to the public. But at the same time, I just hope everyone here knows that, if you are struggling and want support from your community, Somerville really cares about you. It's really been so humbling and so admirable to see how many neighbors have been coming out not only to support Vanessa, but again, renters of all backgrounds to fight for housing justice and tenants' rights. So we are really proud of the work that we've been able to achieve through this campaign. Okay, next slide. Okay, Great. So I think the last takeaway I just want to really let folks know is that as OHS and CAAS HAP said before, we are here to help Somerville residents, especially renters like you. If you're facing an eviction, if your rent has gone up and you don't think you can afford it, if your building has been sold, if you're facing bad living conditions or poor treatment by your landlord, we can help you. You don't have to move out. Help is available. And again, our goal as a community organizing team is to help you meet your neighbors so that you can organize together for a better outcome in the long term. So this last slide includes our website where you can contact us. And that's a photo of what our online contact form looks like. You can also call the office, that's our extension, email us, and we are also on social media. So if anyone is on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, please check us out at CAAS Somerville to see what kind of work and opportunities we are up to. So I think that's the end of the presentation. Sam, if you want to stop sharing slides. Okay, great. Thank you all so much. Thank you for listening to our presentation this evening. And I guess now we're going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes doing some question and answer, and then we will end the event. So Ellen, I'm in the process of just double checking here. We got a couple questions come through the chat. So the first question, Ellen, we have are, someone was wondering if you could give us examples of public assistance and housing subsidies other than Section 8. And this person was wondering if like assistance from Metro Housing Boston, like RAFT, is that considered public assistance?
Meaning, I think the question's asking about public charge. Is that, do you think that's what we're asking about here? I'll answer in case it is. I assume it is. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And actually, Katie, not to put you on the spot, but if you're still on the call and would like to come off mute and ask your question a bit more and elaborate, we'd love to invite you to do that for a moment.
Yeah, hi. No, it wasn't about public charge. It was
Okay.
it had, I'm trying to remember, it had something to do with if you have evidence of assistance, it helped as far as finding affordable housing or not getting evicted, I believe. And I was just wondering, like, technically receipt of public assistance or housing subsidy,
Oh.
if that was, if there were other examples of that beyond Section 8, because obviously if you apply for Section 8, it's a long waiting list, and so to get that actual voucher, so like something that's might be more immediate, considered legally that receipt of public assistance.
I think so. Thank you so much for that question. I think one, there's sort of two pieces of that. One, I think, is around discrimination, where we talked about it's unlawful to discriminate against somebody because of receipt of public assistance or of subsidy. So that would be right if you have any kind of government subsidy, like there's something called, the state has something called an MRVP program that you can apply to through Metro Housing Boston. That's a state subsidy. They can't discriminate against you, can't refuse to rent to you if you have that. The other thing is, one of the complicated questions is sometimes we, for example, here's a perfect example. At this period during COVID, sometimes landlords have refused to provide documents to tenants to help them with rental assistance applications for whatever reason. Maybe the landlord's not paying taxes on it, and you ask the landlord to provide those documents. It's actually considered discrimination based on your source of income, because we want to pay that rent that we owe with rental assistance from an agency instead of cash from our account. And if a landlord says no and refuses to participate in that program, the Attorney General has stated that that is a form, a potential. There's always depends on the facts. I always feel the need to say that, but it's potentially discrimination because a landlord can't say, I don't want that money coming from the Homeless Coalition. I want that money coming from your pocket, because the fact that you need that help, that is a protected class within the state of Massachusetts. So I think that was your question. And if there's something else, be happy to try to answer.
It sounds like MRVP would be the other, basically what the other kind of more
Yeah, there's-
immediate resource that would be considered receipt of public assistance or a
So for
housing.
subsidies, MRVP, something called AHVP, there's a lot of different acronyms. HVP is the Alternative Housing Voucher Program. So I think the gist of it is if you get help paying your rent through any kind of rental assistance program, a landlord cannot discriminate against that basis. They cannot say, I don't want to participate in that program because you're telling me I have to have an inspection of the apartment. That's something they can't do. We do try to do carrots and sticks just to let people know. We have a joint program with the Somerville Homeless Coalition where we provide incentives to realtors and landlords who will newly rent to people with Section 8 vouchers and other vouchers. So that's just something to know if you happen to have a voucher and you're struggling to find an apartment, that summer VIP program may be able to help incentivize. So even though it's illegal and we try to enforce on that side, right? That's the stick. We try to get people to do what they're required to do by law, but we also use carrots to try to encourage people to do the right thing. Because ultimately we want people to get the housing that they need. But thank you for that question, Katie.
Thank you.
I also just want to add a 2-second thing, if that's okay, Nicole. But one thing too that comes up, and I think it's right under Ellen's point, is determining whether or not the person that you're renting from is the landlord. And sometimes that does come up in regards to rental assistance. So it may be an issue where the person that you're renting from isn't the actual owner. And the reason they're not giving you documents is because they're not the owners. And so again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but if you suspect that this is something, or if even the landlord is telling you, I don't want to, give you documents for rental assistance, you're my tenant and it's your responsibility, that's an absolute example to call one of our offices, and we can absolutely assess your situation. One, to try and figure out and see, who the landlord is and what's going on in this situation. And number two, we do, as I'm sure all the other agencies have, a copy of the AG, the Attorney General's letter talking about what Ellen said, and we'd be happy to send that to you, to the landlord, to whoever else regarding that issue. So I just wanted to say that one piece.
Thank you for your question, Katie, and thanks, Ellen and Lydia. So I have another question here. Someone has a question about their security deposit in a situation. So this attendee said, my landlord confirmed receipt in writing of a check of the security deposit, but he said he preferred not to put it in the bank. It was several years ago, and after the first year of the lease, he then switched me to a month-to-month lease. Is my landlord still required to pay interest on the deposit since he chose not to open a bank account?
The answer to that would be yes, but even more than that, you can be eligible for up to 3 times the security deposit if the landlord fails to put it in the right kind of bank account. So not only does it have to be in a bank account, that bank account has to collect interest, and it has to be what they call protected from the landlord's creditors. So it's a special security deposit account. So if something happens to the landlord and the landlord goes bankrupt, they can't take that money away. That's your money if it's your security deposit. So there's a number of things you could ask the landlord. You can say, I should have gotten 5% interest. Usually it's 5%, or if you're getting less, it's less. But if they didn't put it in the account, I would demand 5% interest from the entire time since you first put it into that account. And certainly that's something, if somebody was going to try to write a letter like that to their landlord, the kind of thing we can do is help you figure out how to say it and maybe to check over that letter for you and give you some advice. So absolutely, you should be getting interest on that account. And people don't know, You are entitled to interest on a last month's rent as well. So if you've paid a last month's rent or a security deposit or both, you should be getting that interest. And interest rates have been really low, but they're going up again. So at some point, this will feel more meaningful because the amount that you can get in this interest will increase.
Okay, another question, Ellen. It's not from the audience, but it's something I think us as advocates and organizers sometimes encounter. So sometimes tenants apply for rental assistance and they receive a denial. It could be for multitudes of reasons, but even if I was denied and I applied for rental assistance, but now I've fallen behind again and I can't pay my rent, maybe it's because my hours were cut or I was sick with COVID. You know, should I try again? Should I keep applying for rental assistance? Like,
So
what are my options?
thank you so much for asking. Get help from one of these two agencies to get that rental assistance application through, because lots of times people are denied for wrong reasons. And I'm really proud to say that this administration has created something called a flex fund, which has funds of money that are more flexible than the state. There's very few circumstances where we shouldn't be able to find a fund that can help you. So if it's not one, our job is to think, okay, which is the right fund and how do we get you to the right place? So we would really encourage you, especially if you've tried applying on your own before and had difficulty, to get help from one of the agencies here that's presented tonight to make sure that that application is being handled correctly. I think the state, it was almost like 50% of the applications were getting denied if people didn't get help. And I will say from our office, it's well over 95% of the applications that we submit are funded. So if this is done correctly and you get the help you need, in most cases, you should be able to get the rental assistance that you need. I do want to let people know state assistance is really being cut as of April 15th because COVID, a lot of those federal COVID emergency dollars are gone. So it may be a little more complicated in some cases going forward, but if you have a need, reach out now if you can, because whatever applications we can get in by April 15th are going to have there's a lot more resources available. We will still have resources afterwards. And we are getting that $1 million flex fund up and running that's coming that the mayor talked about. I just don't know exactly when that's going to start yet. So if you have a need and you can get an application in by the 15th, please do so. So call one of us before then.
Thanks, Ellen. We got another question of, again, what other types of housing assistance exist other than Section 8, but I think you kind of answered that question. So again,
yeah, I would just go back to saying there's a lot of places. There are on our website, on OHS's website, you can go down to a tab that says accessing affordable housing. And we have links to applications for many different kinds of affordable housing, right? There's Section 8, the kind where you get a voucher and find your own apartment. Then there's multifamily housing, where if you get in, they give you an apartment like public housing. These are things like Cobble Hill, Clarendon Hill Towers, Pearl Street Trust. Each of these buildings has different eligibility requirements. Some are for families, some are for seniors and people with disabilities. So again, right on our website for people that can do their own applications is some really good information and links to almost all of those applications within Somerville. We can also connect you to, because there's housing opportunities outside of the city as well that are really critical for those people who are struggling. So both CAAS and OHS can help you to understand what options are available to you, or if you're able to do applications online and navigate technology somewhat, please go onto our website, click on the different affordable housing opportunities and get in as many applications as you can. If you don't get an application in, you don't get housing. And again, I would refer you to the 100 Homes program and the inclusionary programs. The links are on the training, and those are other opportunities in addition to all the multifamily housing and public housing and Section 8 and other voucher programs we've been talking about. Last, the Homeless Coalition has some of its own programs. It has a PASS program and CAAS they both now have programs that can help for between 1 and 2 years rent in an emergency period. So lots of different opportunities out there. It's tough. I'm not going to pretend that anybody who applies for housing is going to get it. It's tough. But if there's a path, we'll get you onto that path.
I just want to say one last thing with what Ellen said is that, you know, even if the application takes 5 years, 2 years, 3 years or more, we look at it as an insurance policy, right? And to have that application, to have that your name on a wait list, I think is the most important piece, right? Even if it's nothing that's going to happen, you know, from now to tonight, right? So this is, again, another encouragement to call us. And, you know, ask us individually, right, what your options are. Because as Ellen said, there's a lot of different resources for a lot of different income levels and a lot of different immigration statuses, and we could have our own separate training regarding that as well. So we really do encourage you to contact us directly to talk more about what options may be available to you.
Okay, so it's about 8 p.m. So we're gonna close the webinar. I just want to thank our presenters, Ellen and Lydia from OHS and Charlotte and Anna from CAAS HAP. Again, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom this evening. Thank you so much to Mayor Katjana Ballantyne, who was with us earlier. We really appreciate the city's partnership and commitment to housing stability in Somerville. So everyone will receive an email by Friday with these presentation slides and a recording of the webinar, as well as our contact information. So again, Somerville Tenants, you have rights. Don't move out, and please contact us if you need help. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.